Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about how we can group phrases into three different kinds of structures: periods, sentences, and hybrids. So at the core of all of these things is the basic idea. It's going to be the first chunk of music that you hear, and there are a couple of things that we can do with this basic idea. The first thing is that we can repeat it, and repeating it doesn't mean necessarily repeating it exactly the same way. We can vary it a little bit, we can change it in its pitch level. As long as it's still recognizable as that basic idea, you'd probably be fine. Or we can vary it. We can do something different. And then the three types of structures all have the same kind of building blocks. So a sentence has two different building blocks. It has the presentation and the continuation. So the presentation is just two basic ideas in a row. So that's a repetition, right? So basic idea, basic idea. It's followed by the continuation, which often takes a part of that basic idea and then runs with it. And so it plays with it and then it goes to a cadence, usually an authentic cadence. A period is an antecedent plus a consequent. So antecedents and consequents have really interesting relationships. Basically, the idea is that it's like a question and an answer. So the antecedent asks the question, and the consequent answers it. Antecedent, because of this, usually has a weaker cadence than the consequent. So this antecedent is made up of this basic idea that we've been talking about, and then something else, a contrasting idea. And then the consequent is a basic idea plus a cadence. So maybe in your earlier music theory, you heard of two different types of period, right? The parallel period and the contrasting period, where the parallel period had the same beginning for the antecedent and the consequent, and the contrasting period didn't. In this system, a period is always going to be that parallel period. So a contrasting period is what we're going to call a hybrid. So the hybrids, we have an antecedent plus a continuation, so we're taking one thing from the period and one thing from the sentence, and an antecedent plus a cadence. So really no new interesting material following the antecedent. This is where it kind of gets tricky, because sometimes it's difficult to tell what is a continuation and what is a cadence. I think that the answer to that is to see if there's, first of all, any fragmentation of the antecedent in that second part. If there is, then it's almost certainly a continuation. If it's just music that takes you to the big cadence, then it's going to be a cadence. So let's look at these in action and see if we can make them make sense. So the first one we'll look at is a sentence. And I think this is probably the easiest one to deal with. So let's listen to this. Okay, so what we're looking for in a sentence is the presentation and then the continuation. So when we mark these things, what we're going to do is put a bracket at the beginning of them. So we know that the presentation is probably going to begin at the beginning, and we'll put the word above the staff there. So presentation, we bracket the beginning of it, but not the end. So what we're looking for now in this presentation is a basic idea that is repeated. So if we look at this, that little bit of music, when we get to these second two measures, it's got the same shape, it's obviously really closely connected to that opening one, even though it's not got exactly the same notes. So that would be a good example of a basic idea, and then a basic idea that has been varied just a little bit, but is still really recognizable as that basic idea. And what we're going to do is we're going to put that text underneath. So basic idea, and then after that's done, we have the continuation. So this continuation, we're also going to put a bracket, and then, let's see, continuation. All right. So we're going to put the bracket at the beginning, not at the end. At the end, we're going to say what kind of cadence it was. So we have this big 5-to-1, we have T-Do, so it's going to be a perfect authentic cadence. Sometimes sentences have cadences at the end of the presentation, and sometimes they don't. I think most of the time you're going to find that they do. This one seems like a half cadence, right? So we'll mark that one too. Half cadence. Okay, so we're almost there. Now that we've got the continuation, we have to label where the cadence starts. So usually it's going to be pretty easy to figure out, because in the examples we'll be looking at, things fall into pretty even groupings. So the basic idea was 2 measures. The repeat of it was 2 measures. We can say that the continuation, this first part, the contrasting idea here is 2 measures, and then the cadence is 2 measures. So contrasting idea and then cadence. We sometimes call this cadence the cadential idea. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is to the sentence. We've labeled all of the stuff. So let's now look at a period. Okay, so just to remind you, the period has the antecedent and the consequent. The antecedent is made up of the basic idea plus a contrasting idea. So let's listen to it, see if we can figure it out. Okay, so the basic idea in this case is this. That music there. And that's what we're going to label it. Basic idea. And we're also going to put a bracket at the beginning to show, oops, sorry, basic idea needs to go underneath. And this is the antecedent. So do you hear when we listen to this that the first half seems like it poses the question and the second half sounds like it answers it? Just listen to it one more time. Right, so it's like question that's posed, especially by this half cadence here, and then it's answered by the perfect authentic cadence at the end. So I'll mark those cadences. Got half cadence. Okay, so we've got our antecedent, we have the basic idea. So now we're looking for a contrasting idea. So the first 2 measures, basic idea, this thing here doesn't really sound anything like the basic idea, right? It just is something different. And so it's our contrasting idea. Sorry. Okay, and after the cadence, we start the consequent. So there's my consequent. And this is a consequent because it starts with that same basic idea again. So remember, a period has to be what we used to think of as a parallel period. And if it's not a parallel period, then it's some kind of hybrid. So we have the basic idea, even though it's a little bit different, it's still clearly the same thing. And then the last part, this da-da-dum-bum-bum, is a cadence. And again, that's all there is to it. If you can remember these different parts, you'll have no problem figuring out periods, sentences, and hybrids. All right, almost there. Hybrid. So this one starts the same. Oops. So as I said, the trouble with hybrids is that you have to choose between the antecedent being followed by a continuation or the antecedent being followed by just a big cadence. And what you can look for is some sort of fragmentation. So in this case, we have exactly the same opening. So it's just going to be our basic idea and our contrasting idea. And then all right. Basic idea, contrasting idea, followed by that same half cadence. And we do end with a perfect authentic cadence. And that is what we're going to label the antecedent. So now, does this music here does that have any relation to what we heard in the antecedent? It does, right? So that's sort of the same as, it's got that same shape. It's a scalar pattern followed by a leap. And so I think in this case, we could call this a continuation because it has that fragmentation. And when you're dealing with these continuations, especially with sentence form, it's always a good idea to mark the fragments so that you can see exactly how the basic idea is being manipulated. And then I'm going to put this in here, continuation, and then it ends with just a nice little cadential idea at the end. So that's, whoops, cadence. And I'm going to put contrasting idea again. It's like contrasting idea number 2. Okay, and the last one, but you can guess what this one's going to be. So listen to this one and see if you think the ending is more like a just a big cadence, or whether it has something to do with the basic idea or the contrasting idea. Okay, so again, this is kind of where it gets tricky, because you could probably make an argument for either one, and it's kind of hard to find things that are extremely clearly just cadential. So for the sake of argument, let's say this is a cadential one. So I'm going to put a big cadence, big cadence over here, and then we're going to fill in the rest of our information. So we have a basic idea, this is the antecedent, right? We have the contrasting idea, and then this big cadence is just cadence. And so make sure you mark cadence types, half cadence, and that's all there is to it. So we have period, sentences, and then hybrids, which are kind of combinations of the two. There are more complicated hybrids, but we don't find them very often, so if we find one, I'll tell you about it. Otherwise, we'll just worry about these two types of hybrids. So the antecedent plus the continuation, which is like the contrasting period, and the antecedent plus the cadence. Okay.